Hello and welcome to Breaking the Cycle. My name is Alan Hyde, and tonight we are joined by a special guest, Priya Tahim, licensed professional counselor and owner of Core Counseling.
Yeah,
I said that all correct,
you
yeah?
said it great.
Perfect. What got you into therapy and becoming a licensed professional counselor and then having a crazy idea to come on a podcast and share about mental health? What brought you in these directions?
Well, first, thank you for having me on this show. I'm excited to be here. What got me to be a therapist? That's a really big question. I feel like growing up, I was a middle child, and so I think growing up in a household with two sisters and just a generally loud household, I always felt like my voice didn't matter, which is completely untrue. But that kind of wanted me to help other individuals that might have felt like me to find their voice. And so helping people has always been a passion of mine, but more importantly, helping people help themselves. And so that's kind of what got me in the door of being a therapist. And then taking opportunities like this has been important because I just don't think it's talked about enough. Any type of mental health like issues, and more importantly, like love and relationships. I'm a huge sucker for love, and so I think if we can talk about it, maybe we can help mend a broken heart at the same time.
Sure. Yeah. And as you guys listen along, Priya and I talked earlier in the week about diving into some conversations around self love and relationships, couples, things of this nature. We'll see how much we can get to. There's a lot of information to unpack. I second your take on, just being able to talk about these things more consistently on these platforms where the stuff that goes viral on average are the things that we're not talking about in our offices with our clients.
Yeah.
And it's always interesting because we have a TikTok too. In some of those short form settings, it's almost like a culture shock. People jump on it and have weird takes. And no offense, TikTokers, but it's funny to see like some of the more sound, grounded information we talk about here. It needs to be talked about, needs to be on these platforms. But I think we need some long-winded settings like this to be able to talk about it.
Yeah.
I'm always curious when it comes to self-love. Maybe you've heard this question posed this way or not, but what camp are you in? Are you like a Marianne Williamson type of self-love? There's a few others that are like big camps of like the belief around like self-esteem and these kind of things. What are some of the routes that you gravitate to when you're teaching self-love?
Well, so I tend to pull from a lot of different like individuals, and I think it's mostly because I think everyone's version of self-love is very different, and so the versions I tend to go towards are what makes you happy and what drives you as an individual. And I know there's lots of, I guess, TikTok therapists out there these days, or just like self-help coaches like Jay Shetty
Yeah.
and Mel. I don't know, Mel Robbins, I think, is
She got real popular, yeah.
real bit
Tony
popular.
Robbins' wife.
Yeah, with the whole let them theory. And so I think when it comes to self love, I try to find somebody that my client like feels like they gravitate towards too, and then like we'll research certain topics with that person to help them find like this love within themselves.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, I think, as far as our conversation tonight, we don't need to rock and roll with any one definition of it, but it might be helpful for those listening. How would you, as a therapist, define self-love?
I think when you can learn to fully embrace who you are from the inside and then out, and fully accept and appreciate yourself. And I think that's like when we think about love, it's often about respect or believing in somebody or something. And so you can't expect to do that externally unless you're practicing it internally first.
Yeah, that's 1 second too. Are we good on the microphones with the, yeah? I was getting a lot of feedback. I just wanted to make sure. That seems to be the very consistent route, which is if you want to cultivate healthy relationships, you have to do it internally with yourself first, which ties in directly with how you were describing of like, how are you viewing yourself? Are you cool with your own identity and the ways that you talk to yourself and connect with yourself? And therapy is a wonderful tool, not the only tool that exists, but probably a very potent one to cultivate these things.
Yeah, I mean, I think well, obviously I love therapy, but I know therapy isn't for everyone. But so I would say, like, also just even being able to, like, have a conversation with yourself without feeling ashamed of it. I think also a part of self-love is accepting the parts that we're not so proud of and being able to like grow and learn from them.
Yeah.
And I think that's often not talked about. We always talk about the positive parts of ourselves when we think about self-love, but we don't really talk about how to overcome those like darker corners that everybody has.
Yeah. I was talking to a client this morning about like, it's kind of like you're in your living room, the lights are on, you walk down the hallway, turn the corner, and you're going to go in your room and the light is off, right? And at first maybe you wonder why is the light off, but you turn it on and then there's trash and a pile of clothes and the mattress for some reason is upside down. You're like, I need to turn this light back off, right? I don't want to look at that. And then if you do that long enough, you start to actually believe that the light bulb's burnt out. You'll convince yourself, right? Or that the switch doesn't work. And then therapy is that process of rebalancing into, well, really kind of the way I put it to her was that then somebody comes along and they flip the light on. You're like, wait a second, right? And then you start to see the little bits and pieces you need to clean up. And maybe at that point now we're ready to clean it up, but no one can blame you if you're not. Right? And that's kind of where I think therapists, we come alongside the client of like, are you ready to dip your toes in? And let's just start with the light trash. Let's pick that up a little bit.
Yeah, the small steps I feel like are the most sustainable ones. I think we're really quick to like judge progress based on like this like big shift and like almost when you look in the mirror and it's like you put makeup on when you weren't having worn makeup ever in your life. You're like, oh, that's physical progress I can see. But we forget that it's the internal smaller ones that are like those are the ones that actually are sustainable and make changes.
Yeah.
But I agree. I like that analogy of like the light bulb burning out because I think that's so true. And it feels overwhelming, I think, when people look at like a big mess.
Yeah.
But then when you break it down into smaller ones, it feels more achievable.
Yeah. Yeah. When that metaphor was shared with me in my own work, these kind of things, it's like, yeah, I did convince myself that certain things didn't work the way that they needed to out of survival or out of just kind of this is the way I do things.
Yeah.
Right? Well, it's like we all get to those points, I think, in life where it's like, well, the way I did things on my own led me here to this distress. Maybe I need to try it a different way. That's often how I try to reach dudes, which is another question I was going to ask you with a topic like self-love. How do we reach these men who maybe hear something like self-love and they're like, ugh, let's turn this off. I don't want to hear any of this soft stuff. How do we reach these types of, because it's not just men either. How do we reach people to help soften them to some of these topics?
Well, I think it's about finding some way to communicate in a way that they understand. So like I think there's this a huge movement in Hollywood right now where like they talk about like men coming out and getting help for their mental health, which I love. I think Justin Baldoni just had a podcast himself, like talking about how brave it is for men to come forward, and I think that opened the door for a lot of like individuals that maybe felt like therapy was uncool or showing emotions is uncool. So I think finding something like that where somebody can relate is helpful, but then also like not making it a big deal. I think that when we make something a big deal, it feels like harder to do, or it feels like it's more daunting. So if you just say like normalize that it's okay to have these emotions, I think that opens the door itself.
Yeah. What do you think are some of the culprits as to why somebody would not love themselves?
Probably shame. I think that a lot of it is like, or what will people think? Like somebody else has told them, there's a seed that was planted at some point in their life that was like, this is not enough. You're not enough. But in reality, it's maybe those people weren't enough for you, or maybe that circle wasn't good for you. Yeah. I remember growing up, I mean, my voice is very distinct. I think we can say that. So growing up, I always thought like it was something was wrong with me. Like I had such a high voice, but now I embrace it. I'm like, well, when I'm 80, I'm going to sound like I'm 25. But you have to learn to love those darker parts of you. But when I was younger, somebody planted that seed that like, oh, you sound like a baby, or I was going to be treated like a baby. No one's going to take you seriously. And then once I started doing things for myself and like breaking that stigma, I was able to kind of like put that in a corner.
Yeah. Yeah, it's this is an observable one that you and I see in therapy settings often, and as you were sharing, we have our own experiences with
Mm-hmm.
these things where adults who provide a narrative to a kid who have constant shifting and narratives and developmental milestones to meet and just a shaping of their understanding of the world that's constantly changing. If you're an adult who's had this happen to you, I would just say remember that those narratives that other adults gave to you when you were a kid aren't true about you. Um, you know what narratives are true about you and in the
Mm-hmm.
ways that you struggle or experience distress. And that's between you, some would argue, your higher power, and your therapist, and maybe some trusted friends. But it's like we can move towards letting go of some of those narratives. But you hit the nail on the head as far as like the way I view it too, of like shame. It like molds in and holds on to those narratives and those feelings, and we carry them with us and replay them until we. It's like what Freud says, like we replay these situations and emotions until we feel like we've mastered them,
Mm-hmm.
and we're never going to master them. They're always going to beat us up.
That's a good point, though, just in general, like how like we're never gonna master them. I think if you can apply that same concept to like when healing is not linear, so like you
Mm.
might feel like you're healed from a situation, a relationship, but like a traumatic event, but something might still trigger you, and that's okay too. And I think that's a whole part of the shame thing. It's, well, I should be over this by now,
Mm.
but I think it's really important to highlight that it's okay. It doesn't mean if it still comes up and it still kind of like triggers you at some point that you're not over it. It just means that maybe there's a little bit more that you have to do, or how do we handle it now in a healthier way?
Yeah, yeah. It's everybody is going to have slips.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the way our brains work. A new thought comes in all the time. It's that old adage of um, I'm not responsible for my first thought, but I am responsible for the first action.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it's okay to be triggered and to have these slips, but what we get better at and what therapists help us do is to slow it down, take a pause, play the tape through, all these wonderful tools in the millions of different ways. And I've always resonated with the concepts of self love, to get in there and really slow down um, the emotional chaos that comes with self pity, all right, self righteousness.
Yeah.
All the things that kind of lead us on those roller coasters where now I'm behaving and pushing people away because I don't want to let them, I can't trust that person. It's like these are all the things we would want to come and sit down with a therapist to discuss. If you're wondering, you don't have to be forced, but here's one right here, and if you're liking what she's saying, we'll get you her information. But what do you make of all that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's easy to get caught up in that cycle, and it's a defense mechanism. That's what it is, right? When we isolate from somebody else and we say we can't trust other people, I think when we start to slow it down, like you said, it's really we can't trust ourselves,
Mm.
and I think that's goes back to the whole idea of self love. It's understanding truly like how to accept who we are inside and out. And like if we don't like something about ourselves, that's okay too. I don't think I know anybody that loves every part of themselves.
Right.
But we have to accept it, and what we do with that information, that's what self-love and growth, and like that's how we break that cycle of self-pity and I think self-destruction.
Yeah, yeah. The call AAA, awareness, acceptance, action.
Yep.
Right? I need to be aware of this thing that I don't like about myself, then accept this thing, and then do some action to not beat myself up over it.
Mhm.
And oftentimes, and I'm sure you've seen this in clients, it's like oftentimes people come to a pretty peaceful place of acceptance, even with the things that they didn't like about themselves when they come in, when we can just shed light on it, just embrace it.
That's probably my favorite part of working with clients though, is like when they find their light.
Hmm.
Even if it's like they're not fully there yet, when they start to turn the light on, like the dimmer, I'm like, that's my favorite part of working with a client.
Hmm. Could you shed some light on that experience? And because you and I, we work with these things day in and day out in our own capacities, and so when you share something like that, it's like I could think of a bunch of examples of like the way I would envision what you were just describing. But for someone who hasn't sat in our seat, or even those who are new to sitting in our seat as a therapist, how would you describe like that, like kind of, it's like when the lights come on for a client, the light bulb moments and the new awarenesses, how would you describe it?
I think it would be like riding, like learning to ride a bike without the training wheels. It doesn't mean that you're going to continue, like you're going to be like a pro after the first, like, ride after you take the training wheels off. It just means that like you're trying and you see the movement. And so what I love about that first like switch of like a client understanding that they are moving forward or they are making the changes towards the goals that they're meeting, it's because they're finding that momentum within themselves. It's not something anybody else can take away from them. And I think that's the coolest part because it's something they solely did. My job as a therapist is to help guide them and to help like basically like show them how to put the battery in their flashlight. And it's their job to turn the flashlight on and like to continue to replace the batteries as needed.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good analogy too, because a lot of times and maybe you could attest to this too, but I know for me individually, when I stepped into the realms, not just as a therapist, but going to therapy, it was like, there's always that beginning feeling of like, oh man, I'm going to have to tend to this. I'm going to have to wake up and make sure that I'm doing these things that are recommended. And you see that in clients time and time again, is it's not so much that what's being recommended is so big. It's that clients think so far down the road to all the next times they're going to have to change those batteries, and it's tough. It's a tough sell. I always tell my clients, it's a hard ask, what we're asking you to do, but all you need to do is take a shot today,
I mean, I always say like you're choosing to come sit on the sofa. Why did you choose it? Like, what's driving you to make the change in the first place? And when you start to feel that doubt, or you start to feel like, oh my gosh, this is such a long journey, then I go back to that why. What was your why? And I think that helps a lot of clients like remember like what they're doing it for.
Yeah.
And then I also like, when we have to show up prepared for a session, how I pep talk myself is, like, if the hardest thing I do today is try to push somebody else, I'm okay with that. Because at least I'm helping somebody else. And I learn a lot from my clients. I don't know about you.
Yeah.
Like, I'll walk away from a session and be like, man, I should really apply that too.
Yeah. Yeah. They're all the time. The aspects in my life where, whether it's kind of some of the recovery circles or therapy circles that I'm in, I'll be teaching clients certain things and helping them find their ways into 12-step recovery is predominantly what I work with. And they'll make some reflections. I'm like, man, I need to implement this for myself, or I needed to hear that today. It's a privileged career. It's a very nice place to be in life. I love being a therapist. It's quite wonderful, but it's also fun when you get to sit down and chat with someone else who clearly is having that lived experience too. Because I think it is unique, and not just being a therapist, but it's unique to connect in the communities of people who are taking care of themselves and lean on the information. It's not all on you. These are really nice places to find yourself. And it's why we have these conversations every week, and just a benefit to bring someone else in who clearly has that mindset too is nice.
Yeah, I love that. And I love the community that you're building here, because I think, like you said, I think we work in different kind of areas, but that's just to show that no two therapists are the same.
Yeah.
So our styles can be totally different, and like we learn from each other. Like, I learn a lot from all of my peers, because what techniques they might be using is something that I've never even heard of, or I would have never even implemented.
Yeah.
And that's kind of why I think some of these TikTok therapists are cool, but at the same time, I'm like, you need the long, drawn-out segments.
Yeah.
The snippets can get you in the door.
Yeah.
But what keeps you in the door?
Yeah, I heard this thing the other day too. It's like with short form content, what you run into oftentimes with the masses is that you never know the presupposition that a person has when they hear short form content, their why, or the way they view the topic. And then all the information just kind of floods in from there. It's like, we know this is true just about psychology. The way you view a topic is going to be kind of the vast, wide range of how you view the rest of the topics related to it, and that
Yeah.
the challenge is to be open to feedback and all these kind of things. But with short form content, there's no way to flesh out the conversation, to hear the different perspectives. Because even within the realm of self-love, therapists like you and I who've been doing this work for years, there may be points in a conversation, if we talked for hours and hours, where we'd run into places where like, oh, I hadn't thought of it that way, or I may not even necessarily fully agree, or you may not agree, but what's the consensus here? What are we talking about? And that's the value, I think, for clients sticking with therapy for longer periods of time too. That's kind of just how I was trained as well, that therapy can be a long-winded process, very psychoanalytic and psychodynamic, I know, but I'm a huge proponent of that healing takes time.
Me too. I've had clients that I've seen, I mean, on and off for like years. And then I've also had clients that are more of that short term, like I don't really have a lot I need to work on, just more targeted growth. But I'm a huge advocate for like, continuing to check in with their therapist like over time, and just making sure that you're giving time to the healing journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking about people taking individual responsibility, let's take a turn and talk about couples a little bit. What would you say to the people who say that couples therapy is just to put a placard up on the wall to show everybody that you tried before you left the relationship? I love asking therapists that question because I think it's hilarious. I think it's a funny, people make up all kinds of things in their head, but
Yeah, I mean, I think that if that's your goal, cool. But like, I mean, therapy's not cheap either. So
Yeah.
if you're spending that much money to just get a pat on the back saying like you gave it your all, like obviously you're not in the right relationship.
Yeah.
But I think that like it actually investing time into the couple's journey, and like it's not just like a mediator in the room. Like my job is to really hear both parties and like to help try to facilitate that communication to each other. Like I think it's really hard. I think Jay Shetty did this video, I think it was a couple years ago, where he said that when two people get married or move in together, they both think the way they wash the dishes is right.
Mm-hmm.
And then like, or that's how they should run the household. And that's why we see a lot of couples fail, is because we think it's your way or my way, now or our way. And so he went on to talk about the importance of learning each other's style and coming up with a style for the couple. So I think that's what couples therapy is about, is like learning your style, or like the couple style, not yours or my style.
Yeah, and I've always liked the concept of don't get so worked up off the rip over roommate problems. Right? Is this a relationship problem or a roommate problem?
That's a good way to put it.
Trash, dishes, cleanliness, these kind of things are roommate problems where we need to find a new way, right? Because, I could just speak as a dude who lived on his own for a long time. It's like I needed to find a new way,
Yeah.
And I think most men probably run into that. But it's similar on the other side, right? Really any relationship, not even just heterosexual relationships, two different people living together need to find a new way. And some of it is like you just kind of got to get through it because it's going to be painful, because maybe you've done your way for a really long time.
You have to learn to adjust. But I think that's a part of being in a relationship, right? When you're inviting somebody into like your inner circle, like your innermost circle, like you have to learn to adjust and allow somebody else in then. And I think that's the reason why we run into so many problems, is because people aren't always ready to be in relationships, but they think they are. And instead of like learning along the way, it sometimes like blows up, and then that's when they start to learn.
Right. Well, there are clues to this too in society that you and I are privy to when we turn on social media, but a good indicator that I've always found as to why there are a lot of people out there who may not be ready for like companionship, partnership, more of the like, now we're talking about meeting needs side of relationships, is like, well, the viral conversations are, you complete something in me. It's like, well, that is a awful foundation to start off on for any relationship. That's my opinion. I'm sure others have other opinions. Well, we know others have other opinions, but I'm curious, working with couples as often as you do, is that also an aspect that you hold to as well, that you got to be the fullest version of yourself in order to find the fullest version of somebody else for a relationship to work, or would you state that differently?
I wouldn't say you have to be like your fullest version, but I would say you have to be happy by yourself.
Mm.
Because if you're happy by yourself, then you can enjoy being happy with somebody else, and if they leave you, you can still be happy.
Mm.
So I think like that's one thing I would say. But the other part of like having the idea of someone completing you, I don't know. It's such an absurd like it's a big concept to like have some like a lot of pressure to put on somebody.
Yeah.
And I don't think somebody should complete you. I think somebody can add value to your life, but I don't think they complete you.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that concept too, right? It's like, well, it's why I ask when I have the opportunity to sit down with therapists, is because, if I were to just sit in my own office, never talk to another therapist about these concepts, then yeah, I would just hold to that. And then if I was ever in the situation, I would just talk like this. But there are other therapists who have a different perspective, a different angle on looking at it. And I like the aspect of being, it's like happy or content with yourself, right? Before you can really even get to know like that person on the other end. I think about it of like, if what is super loud in your head, like as I was hearing you explain, it's like if what's super loud in your head is this thing or multiple things you don't like about yourself, how are you ever going to remember to ask that other person about who they are?
Yeah.
And then if you don't do that, how are you going to catch deal breakers, right? Hold boundaries for yourself. I mean, you're not even getting the vital information. And I think that's a lot of times why you see like the dating culture the way it is. It's like boom, 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 blow up here, blow up there, because there's no time to set boundaries and get to know a person or to cultivate a deeper connection.
We also live in a world of instant gratification right now. Like you break up with someone an hour later, you can have a full like week of dates like at your fingertips, right? So I think that's also I think why a lot of relationships fail, is because people think that there's so many options out there. I was reading, and I can't remember who said this, but you often see people leave the 80 to 90% in their partner because they're going after that 10 to 20% of like the surface level things, or like the roommate things.
Yeah.
But in reality, like what they actually are looking for is that 80 to 90% that they left.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think it's really hard to find that when you're not, like when you don't have that full like ability to see somebody for who they are, because you don't see yourself for who you are.
Yeah. Yeah, the vulnerability, the transparency with self. This is why, and I'm guilty of it. I did the dating apps and things when I was younger. When I'm working with people, I'm not a proponent of those things, really only for those kind of aspects. Is it complicates being transparent a lot of times. Not everybody, right? I want to be very clear about this, that there are plenty of people on those dating apps who are being transparent and honest and open and are healthy people. This is not a blanket idea here. I also work with individuals who are in distress, who aren't being the most transparent day to day, and they're running rampant on those dating apps. And I think that mucks things up, right? I think in general in the dating world always has. It's dating apps now, but in the past it was you go out and this is what you're running into in the nightlife, which also still exists. So the transparency, the honesty, the growth in yourself is extremely important for, as I was listening to you, the companionship part of it, not leaving the 80% of things that you can, right, put up with for things that you also could put up with but annoy you, right? I'd be curious what you think of this one. My therapist would always tell me this. The question is, this behavior that annoys you, if it never changes at all, even a little bit, can you put up with that for the rest of your life? If your answer is yes, I would choose this person a million times over, you're good to go. If the answer is no, you need to get out. I'm curious if you would agree or add anything to that, or restate any of those kind of boundaries in the ways that you use it with your clients.
I'm laughing because I literally said that to a client yesterday. No, I think that's a really valid question. If you can put up with something and you're really saying like for the next 50, 60 years, like this is your person, then why is it annoying you so much? Is it because maybe you're just not like, you just don't have enough patience of the day, like your energy levels, like, and this is where the self-reflection piece is so important, because you can be in a healthy relationship and have like a really bad day and not have the energy to put up with something, and that's what causes these annoyance buildups.
Yeah.
So if you have the knowledge of like where you're at, you're able to communicate that to your partner. But if you really can't put up with like things like smacking, like people smacking their food when they're talking, like that's gonna annoy you, like then this relationship is probably not for you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that example too, because years ago when my therapist first brought this one up to me, she used the example of like someone who eats crackers in bed.
Yeah.
Like, and then the crumbs are all over the bed. And I was sitting there, I was like, I don't know if that'd be a deal breaker for me. It'd be annoying, sure, because, you know, I don't like to eat in bed, you know, but all of that to say, I was cracking up because deal breakers can be anything. It can be anything from really rotten behaviors to things that just really are truly going to be a bugaboo and drive you up a wall.
Yeah.
And it's really important. I do a lot of this with my clients too, to identify at least the 2 or 3 firm known deal breakers if you're entering into a relationship, because you got to know if they come up.
Yeah.
Or else we know this, people waste a lot of their life in relationships without paying attention to those deal breakers. And I'm sure you've heard it even probably today. I know I heard it today, like I stayed and I knew I should have left, and then all of a sudden 7 years went by. And it's like, this is what we do to ourselves when we're not holding boundaries, when we're not loving ourselves with those boundaries.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm guilty of it. I stayed in a marriage for I think 8 years, knowing I probably should have never even gotten married in the first place. But I use that to help me like help my clients, because if somebody can learn from my story, then they know that they're not the only person sitting across from a stranger, basically like feeling again the shame or whatever it is that was going through their mind at that time.
Yeah. Yeah. We're our best tools, our sharpest tools. And it's just uncanny. I always crack up too, because my therapist used to tell me, just pay attention. You'll learn to laugh when you see your higher power puts in your path the clients who are presenting with the things you need to work on.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you've seen it in your profession where it's like, I knew I needed to be paying attention to this today, you know, or, you know, for me years ago, it was, I know I need to pay attention to this in the broader scheme of my life, right? And therapy has an uncanny way of presenting those things both to the clinician and to the client as that relationship unfolds. It's beautiful. It can be heavy, but fun at the same time. So if you're scared, jump in, be scared, do it. It's okay.
I promise it's worth it though.
It is. It is.
You just have to find the right fit for your therapist too. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but like when I've tried to find a therapist, sometimes like either somebody didn't have the same, like a style that I guess I responded to, or maybe they just weren't as knowledgeable. And so when I finally found my therapist, I'm like, please don't go anywhere.
Yeah. My first 2 therapists, great women. They weren't exactly the right fit for me. I was also a lot younger at that point too, like a bull in a china shop with my emotions kind of deal. They did their best.
Yeah.
Not the right fit for where I was at the time. But the third therapist who I've been with for years and years now, she came recommended to me at a point when I was at distress, and another therapist who I trusted that I worked with, like, confronted me in a corner and was like, hey, are you okay?
Yeah.
You know, you're too good at this to be letting the distress that we can all see, you know. So it came recommended directly, and it just was a godsend. And so I always tell my clients too to pay attention to those kind of things, right? Listen to your gut as well, and bring it into the room. You know, I've had plenty of clients in my career, I'm sure you as well, where they'll tell me that it doesn't feel like a fit, or that they didn't like the way that I did, you know, a certain intervention. I have tons of clients where that's happened, where they didn't like a certain way maybe I said something, right? Because I'm a dude and I'm everybody's dad, brother, boyfriend, husband, right?
Yeah.
And then they get to see that as a man, I'm gonna own that. And like, okay, how would we like to hear that, you know? And maybe they've never been asked that. And so sometimes there's also those transitions, that helps you find the right therapist too.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I've also found where sometimes they'll stick around for years after that, still it's not the right fit, and we
Yeah.
get them to the right person. You know.
I mean, when I was a newbie therapist, that was the hardest conversation I think to have because you always want people to like you. But
Uh-huh.
now I'm like I had a new client yesterday that I was like, I just don't think we're a good fit. But I'm totally happy to help find someone else. And
Yeah.
I think those conversations feel more authentic now. And like, again, like if as a therapist, if I can tell you I'm not the right fit for you, like, and you can, or you tell me you're not the right fit, I'm like even more proud of you because I'm
Yeah.
like, you're fighting and advocating for what you need. And that's important part of therapy.
Yeah, you know, they're your resources, all
Mm-hmm.
right? And you don't have to worry about, that open slot on my caseload. There people are looking for therapy. It's okay.
Yeah.
You getting to a place where you can open up and talk through things when that's the crux of the issue in the first place is infinitely more important, I think, even spiritually than whether or not, I have a full caseload.
Exactly. It's not about me or us. It's
Right.
about them and what they're looking for in that moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So couples, what as we have a captive audience here, what would you say is kind of like the main way you would? I want to be clear about this because there are a million different nuances, and I want to make sure that I just get some tidbits from you to share with them. But what are some of the main things that you're recommending, homework assignments that you give that would be worth taking a few minutes to describe that aren't like some of the big ones that where you and I would sit down and have to explain to people over long periods of time? Like, what are some of the things you gravitate to that are quick, easy ways that you recommend people work on in couples therapy?
One, learning your love language. I think
Oh, interesting.
like
Yeah.
taking the love language quiz, I always recommend it and probably in my intake to have everyone take it before our next session because I think we're often brought up to learn to love in a way that we like to receive love, not necessarily the way our partner would like to receive it. So if we can understand our partner's style and our style, we can communicate our needs a lot better. And the other big thing I always work on is attachment styles. So you see a lot of people with different attachments, and for some reason you always, well, not always, but you see a lot of like anxious attachment with avoidant attachment styles. And what that does is it creates this like almost like a domino effect because we'll see one chasing the other and one running away.
Yeah.
So if we can understand why we operate a certain way, we're more able to have that secure attachment with each other.
Yeah.
So those are like my two like big ones, or like more like ones I use with every couple.
When you're introducing a couple, let's say they have no background at all, they're coming into therapy just fresh. They're like, "Oh my God, what's going on?" What books do you recommend for like attachment and things like that that are palatable for couples?
Well, I think with the attachment, actually, there's a website, the Attachment Project. I always just send them to that website because they have like lots of different resources within the website, and a lot of couples are like, we are too busy to read.
Yeah.
Or I actually recommend the 7 principles to healthy marriage, even if they're not, even if it's a couple that's not married. I think the Gottman book is really, really good to read for all couples.
I was wondering if I was going to hear some Gottman stuff.
Yeah.
Of course, it's it's the gold standard in those realms, sure. Yeah.
Yeah, they're like I would say like the movie stars of couples therapy, right?
Yeah.
But I also focus on like understanding emotions. So like I pull from Gottman a lot, but I also use emotional focus therapy because if we can focus on our emotions and understand them, then again we can communicate our needs and have more realistic expectations of our partner.
Yeah.
But I do love the Attachment Project website just because they have great quizzes that are free for clients to take, as well as the resources attached to it.
I like that recommendation too because, like you said, especially with couples where if they have little tykes running around, I mean, the odds that they sit down and read 100, 200, 300 page book, it's like we may get to that in a couple years.
Yeah. So like, and also what I'll do is like with the Gottman book, for example, like sometimes I'll pull it out within the session and we'll like go through like the questions together and then I'll have them do the activity afterwards. But I wouldn't say like I have like a playbook that I apply to every couple or that walks into my office. I really do try to tailor it
Yeah, yeah.
for the people sitting in front of me.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I think in these settings, one of the crimes is that we can never really fully express the nuance of therapy.
Mm-hmm.
I think we do our best week to week in the conversations. I watch the therapists that I bring onto the show, and they do just like you, just doing such a great job of expressing different aspects of therapy. But I think it's worth stating, like as a host who's done this week in and week out, it's like there's so much nuance to what we do that you and we would need 10 hours to sit down to talk on a podcast to really cover even close to like what you did today in your
Mm-hmm.
therapy sessions, you know? And neither of us have time for that. We want to sleep and hang out with the people in our personal lives, right? It's like,
Yeah.
so just, I would say keep those things in mind as you listen to stuff like this. Social media is a great starting point, but reaching out to Priya for her practice and the clinicians that she's employed is always where you're going to get the real information.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to ask questions. Or like I always tell my clients, if you see something and you're curious about it, bring it up. Let's talk about it. Because if I don't know something, then I'll go research it, and then I'll tell you if it's appropriate to work with or not. But there are so many different modalities and therapy styles. It's really hard to like you said, talk about it all in one setting.
Yeah. How do you handle intake calls when the intake call is I want to come to couples therapy, but so and so my partner needs some convincing? Do you allow them to go sort that out on their own and then come to you? Do you walk them through that? I've heard a lot of different kind of ways, and I'm mostly just kind of curious how you do it in your practice and what maybe they could expect. Because I think a lot of
Yeah.
people approach in those kind of ways. We're like, well, I want them to go, you know?
I always try to say you can't force anybody to
Yeah.
do anything, but I say like if your partner is curious and wants to have like a separate call, we can totally do that. But usually, like if you get them in the door and have them to do that one intake session, I would say like 8 out of 10 times they tend to stick around. Um, but I really do try to say like if they have questions, if they want to just talk to me separately or any of my associates, we can go that avenue. And if they don't want to come, then you can still go to therapy. Like you can still have your individual approaches, and we can help you like facilitate how to advocate for yourself outside a session.
Yeah. And where can they find your information? Just to make sure while we got you live that they can get your website and come find you guys, you and your team.
Yeah, it's www.corecounseling.org, and then we're also on Instagram and Facebook at Core Counseling.
And that's KAUR.
Yeah,
Counseling.
KAUR, Core.
Yeah. So you'll see in our post, we've tagged your Instagram. In the YouTube video, when it goes from live to just a static video, we'll make sure your website is on the description as well. So if you're watching it in that way, you'll see the description, Priya's website, and you can get in touch with her and her team.
Yes, please. Even if you have any questions, we're happy to answer them and then point you in the right direction if we're not a good fit.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what I love about, like you were saying earlier, building this community is anytime you run into therapists, especially practice owners, we're out here trying to make sure that the clients get the right fit.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I love that about independently owned practices. We could probably go on soapboxes talking about these big conglomeration of practices that have cropped up in the world, but we'll spare our time on some of those things, I think.
Yeah, I mean, even those texting therapy
Oh
practices.
my gosh. You know, we're not sponsored by BetterHelp, so screw them. You know? How are we doing on time, Chance? Cool. With the captive audience that we have, is there any last statements that you would make to them, just kind of about self-love or couples therapy or anything that you want to make sure you share with them? And then I have a question for you.
Yeah, I think one thing I like to tell all my people that walk in my office is falling in love with yourself is the best love story. So if you can fall in love with yourself, I think you've already made it.
Yeah, I like that. If we were going to build a mental health amusement park and you got to build a ride at that amusement park, what would you name it and what would it do?
Oh gosh, I've never been asked this question before. Probably something about anxiety. I'm imagining that character from Inside Out too, the anxiety orange character.
Oh, the one that spins around?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So something along the lines of like anxiety, like a tornado type thing, and learning to slow it down and manage it would be my goal.
On the ride, would you have your own control panel?
Probably, or like I could see like one of those like laser tag things where like you're shooting these negative thoughts that are coming out.
I like that. And what would you call it?
I don't know, zap the thoughts.
We'll take it.
That's a good question.
Yeah. Well, thank you for indulging me in that one.
Thank you for asking me.
Yeah. And also, thank you for being here.
And I appreciate you for having me on this show.
Yeah.
It's been a cool experience.
Yeah, well, I'm glad. Absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, Priya Tahim, licensed professional counselor, owner of Core Counseling. You'll find her information in the descriptions when you're watching this video. We break the cycle here every Friday night at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.